The Emperor, he was a man of excess, of boundless desires. He was not satisfied with ruling an empire that stretched from the glistening shores of the east to the jagged peaks of the west. No, he wanted more than any mortal could ever desire. His name, Emperor Kirod of the Obsidian Dynasty. In his court, wealth flowed like a river. His kingdom was the jewel of the known world. But he was not content. Kirod's obsession grew slowly, imperceptibly. It started, as many obsessions do, with something small, a gift from a distant kingdom. A gift that, once it entered the emperor's hands, would never leave. A tea set, ancient and intricate, of rare porcelain, given to him by a traveling emissary from the farthest reaches of his empire. At first, it was only an elegant curiosity, but soon it became an obsession. The emperor spent hours contemplating the cups, tracing their designs, wondering about the hands that had shaped them, the hands that had carefully painted the patterns. A symbol of wealth and luxury, yes, but something more. The cup was delicate, fragile, something beautiful that could shatter at any moment. It was the beginning of the end. Emperor Kirod, upon first laying eyes on the teacups, immediately recognized their allure, yet he failed to see the curse that accompanied them. The cup was more than just a relic. It was a vessel for a secret too dark for even the most powerful minds to grasp. In the earliest years of Kirod's reign, the empire was at its peak, but as the seasons turned, whispers began to circulate within the court. Whispers of a hidden enemy, whispers of traitors. They spoke of poison, the slow, insidious kind, one that was never detected by the naked eye, one that took its time before revealing itself. It was in the year 375, a year marked by dark omens and strange portents, that the emperor first tasted the poison not in his food. No, Kirod was far too careful for such a crude method. He drank from his treasured cups, cups that had become a personal symbol of his control and grandeur. Each day, he sipped from the porcelain, his obsession growing deeper. The faint taste of bitterness, a strange aftertaste. At first, it was nothing, just a fleeting sensation. But soon it grew, a subtle sense of nausea, followed by dizziness, a sharpness in his chest that grew stronger every day. He believed it was a mere coincidence. After all, poison in his tea. Ridiculous, but soon there was no denying it. One evening, Kirod was found in his private chambers, eyes wild, staring at the cups before him. His servants had heard his mutterings, mumbling about betrayal, about the insidious forces at work. But no one dared to ask him what he meant. For Kirod, the world was closing in. He was no longer the man he had once been. He grew thinner, his skin paler, his once regal features now drawn and sickly. The poison worked its magic, slowly draining him of life. But the emperor wasn't stupid. He could feel the end approaching, and with it came his frantic desire for control. But what Kirod didn't know, what no one knew, was that the cups were not simply poisoned by accident. No, they had been cursed long ago, by those who had sought power in more devious, more dangerous ways. The cups were connected to a legend whispered in the halls of the old temples. It was said that these cups were not just vessels of tea, they were vessels of the soul, drawing out the essence of those who drank from them. The more you drank, the more you gave of yourself. But the emperor, in his desperation, did not care for such things. He didn't believe in curses. He only believed in control. The first signs were subtle. He started to hear whispers, voices in the shadows. He saw glimpses of figures in his peripheral vision, figures that faded when he turned. At night, the darkness seemed thicker, oppressive, suffocating. He could feel the air change, charged with something he could not understand, but still, he drank, and he spiraled further into madness. As the Emperor's obsession deepened, so did his isolation. The whispers in the palace grew louder, their voices now impossibly close, as though the walls themselves conspired against him. But the Emperor, maddened by his pursuit of power, refused to hear reason. He only heard one thing: his thirst. His insatiable thirst for control, for immortality, for the ancient power that he believed was buried within the teacups. His trusted servants grew fearful of him, and the courtiers whispered behind closed doors, but no one dared speak out. They had all seen his gradual decline, his tremors, his bloodshot eyes, but none could understand the full extent of his torment. None could know the horrors that had begun to take root in his mind. It was then, one late autumn evening, that the Emperor had a vision that would forever change the course of his empire. The vision began in the tea leaves. At first, they appeared to swirl in a harmless, familiar pattern, a simple dance of fate. But then, something changed. The leaves twisted, contorted, until they formed shapes, vivid, menacing shapes. A face, pale and distorted, grinned at him from within the steaming cup. The eyes, they were not human. The Emperor recoiled in terror, but the face remained, unblinking. And then, a voice, hollow and cold, whispered in his ear, "You have taken what was never meant for you." Kirod's heart raced. He tried to throw the cup away, but his fingers refused to obey. He could not tear his gaze from the reflection staring back at him in the tea. The voice continued, the words heavy, like stones sinking into the deepest waters. "The curse is upon you. The poison is in your blood, and it will never leave." The Emperor collapsed to his knees, the teacups scattering across the floor, shattered into jagged pieces. His breath came in ragged gasps, his hands trembling as the darkness seemed to close in. But then, something new happened. The shadows within the room began to shift and move, twisting, turning, until they formed into figures, spectral forms that seemed to emerge from the very walls. Faces from the past. Faces of those who had died in the Emperor's wake. Traitors, enemies, those who had fallen by his hand. The spirits began to wail, their voices like nails on stone, dragging themselves toward the Emperor. And then, the whispers took form, figures dressed in the ancient robes of the priests who had originally cursed the cups, their eyes hollow and glowing with an eerie light. "You have brought this upon yourself, Emperor. The price of power is not measured in gold or lands, but in blood. And your blood, Kirod, will feed this empire's undoing." The Emperor, desperate, tried to run, but the shadows were faster. They reached out, their hands like cold iron, dragging him back to the teacups. The floor beneath him cracked, splitting wide open as the ground seemed to consume him, dragging him down into the darkness. But then, the vision ended. Kirod awoke with a start, his body drenched in sweat, his breath coming in short, frantic bursts. His once sharp mind was now fractured, broken. The teacups, still before him, gleamed in the dim light, their delicate porcelain mocking his weakness. The Emperor was no longer the man he had been. The curse, the poison, it had already begun to take root, but he could not let go. His obsession had transformed him into something less than human. And still, he drank, while Kirod's grip on his mind and body weakened. The empire began to fracture. The once mighty Obsidian dynasty was now vulnerable, its foundations eroding beneath the weight of its ruler's madness. It did not take long for word to spread across the realm, whispers of the Emperor's strange behavior, of his obsession, with the cursed teacups, began to reach even the most remote corners of the empire. The people of the empire had long feared the emperor's cruelty, but now they began to fear something far worse, the emperor's madness. But as Kirod's empire crumbled, another force began to rise, one that had lain dormant for centuries. The priests of the old ways, those who had once worshipped the gods of the underworld and had placed the curse on the teacups, saw an opportunity to reclaim what had been lost. They had waited for this moment, for the emperor's downfall, and they would stop at nothing to see his blood spilled, to reclaim the power that he had stolen. The time is upon us. The emperor's madness is our opportunity. He is weak. We will strike now, before the poison consumes him entirely. The curse will be complete, and the dynasty will fall. Gaius and his followers began to stir unrest within the empire. They travelled from village to village, spreading word of the emperor's madness, of the dark rituals that had led to his downfall. They spoke of a new dawn, a new ruler who would restore balance and free the people from the emperor's grip. But it wasn't just the priests who moved in the shadows. Within the palace itself, those who had once been loyal to the emperor began to plot. The noble families of the court saw an opportunity to reclaim their power. They saw the empire's collapse as a chance to rise, to seize what Kirod had once hoarded, and they, too, began to make their plans. One by one, the emperor's former allies began to turn against him, their knives hidden behind smiles, their loyalty replaced by ambition. They could sense the empire's inevitable collapse, and they wanted to be the ones to pick up the pieces. The palace was no longer a place of celebration, of regal dinners and grand feasts. Now, it was a labyrinth of whispers, where trust had long since withered and died. Emperor Kirod's descent into madness created a vacuum of power, and in that darkness, the snakes of ambition slithered forward, each one more willing than the last to strike when the moment was right. Lady Celestra, once one of Kirod's most trusted advisors, had already made her decision. She had watched him fall, watched him drink the poison, and become a shadow of the man he once was. Now, she plotted his downfall. In the wake of his madness, she saw an opportunity to take what she had long been denied: power, influence, and control of the empire itself. But she wasn't alone. Other nobles, too, had formed their alliances. They saw in Kirod's weakness the perfect moment to wrest control from his fragile grip. They would wait until he had finally succumbed to the poison, and then they would step in, taking the empire for themselves. Her betrayal was already in motion. She had arranged for Kirod to be poisoned not once, but twice, through the teacups, and then through the food. She had been meticulous in her plans, but what she hadn't counted on was the emperor's determination to cling to life, to his obsession with the cursed teacups. She hadn't counted on the darkness inside him growing stronger with each sip. As Kirod's health deteriorated further, the poison he had been consuming daily slowly worked its way deeper into his body, reaching his very soul. It was in those moments, alone in his chambers, that the emperor's true transformation began. The poison no longer just crippled his body, it began to warp his mind. He no longer saw the world as it was, but as it had become in his deluded vision. The walls of the palace, once grand, now felt oppressive. Kirod could hear whispers in every crevice. He could smell death in the air, feel the cold presence of the spirits that had long since begun to invade his thoughts. He was no longer alone. The curse, it seemed, was not only confined to the tea cups. It had taken root within him. The emperor's sanity was slipping. His movements were jerky, unpredictable. His speech slurred as he babbled about enemies hidden in plain sight. It was no longer clear whether he was talking about the traitors within his court or the spectral figures that haunted his nightmares. But still, he drank. Still, he clung to his obsession, believing that if he just drank enough, if he just took one more sip, the power would be his again, that the curse could be lifted, that the poison would cease to be his tormentor. But it was no longer just a matter of poisoning the body. The curse had taken a new shape. It now had a life of its own. The teacups were no longer simply a means to an end. They had become the very tool of his undoing, manipulating his every thought, his every action. His mind was no longer his own. The moment of reckoning arrived swiftly. The poison had reached its final stage, and Kirod's body could no longer sustain itself. The court, now divided between those who plotted to replace him and those who still clung to the hope that he would recover, was in turmoil. The palace was a powder keg, ready to explode. Lady Celestra was there, along with the other conspirators. The time had come. They had planned this moment for years, waiting for the Emperor's weakness to reach its apex. And now, with Kirod's inevitable collapse, they saw their chance to seize the throne. But there was a complication. Kirod had not died. Not yet. He had become a shell of his former self, driven by a single purpose: to drink from the cups again, to seek the power that had eluded him. He was no longer concerned with ruling the empire. He only sought to control the darkness that had consumed him. And then it happened. With the Emperor's final sip, the curse was fulfilled. The spirits that had plagued him for years now took their revenge. The air grew thick with a suffocating presence. The noble conspirators, too eager to strike, found themselves in the grip of a force beyond their comprehension. They were consumed by terror as spectral hands reached from the shadows, pulling them into the abyss. The room erupted in chaos. Screams filled the air as the once mighty court descended into madness. The nobles who had conspired against Kirod fell to the ground, convulsing, their eyes wide with fear. One by one, they disappeared, swallowed by the cursed shadows. It was then that Kirod, his mind a broken mirror, realized the full extent of his mistake. The curse was not just on him. It had consumed the entire dynasty. The empire that had once been the jewel of the world was now nothing but a crumbling ruin. His obsession had led him to ruin, and in his final moments, he understood that the poison in his blood had not been the true cause of his downfall. No, it was his greed, his need to control, to hold power over everything, even death itself. The last remnants of the Obsidian dynasty were swept away by the ghosts of its past, leaving behind nothing but a palace in ruins and a people cursed to live in the shadows of what once was. The fall of Emperor Kirod marked the end of an era. The once great Obsidian dynasty crumbled in a single night, the power vacuum leaving the realm in chaos. No one ever truly understood what had happened that fateful night, but the legend of the poisoned teacups persisted, whispered from generation to generation. The teacups, however, remained, lost, forgotten, or perhaps in some dark corner of the world, still waiting for their next victim. Some say the cups still hold the power to summon the spirits of the past, that the poison still lingers within their delicate porcelain, that anyone who dares to drink from them will be cursed to walk the same path as the Emperor, their thirst for power leading them into the same madness. As for the Emperor, his legacy is one of terror, a ruler consumed by his own obsessions. The empire he builds is now only a shadow, a warning to those who dare to reach too high. The cursed cups still stand as silent witnesses to his rise and his bloody fall. What is the cost of obsession? What price must be paid for the pursuit of power? Decades passed, but the story of Emperor Kirod did not fade. The fall of his dynasty became myth, whispered among the remnants of his empire, the ghosts of his reign haunting the corners of the world. But there were always those seeking power, seeking wealth, or simply seeking answers who would dare to test the myth. Varric had heard the tale of the poisoned teacups, the last relics of the Obsidian dynasty. He had studied the emperor's descent into madness, and the more he uncovered, the more obsessed he became. Like Kirod, he believed that the key to unimaginable power lay in the cursed relics. He traveled across the lands, seeking out remnants of the emperor's dynasty. What remained of the once great kingdom now lay in ruins, its ancient cities buried beneath centuries of neglect. But somewhere, deep in the forgotten heart of Kirod's empire, the teacups were said to remain. Still, Varric was not deterred. He was determined to unlock the secret, the dark secret, that had brought an empire to its knees. The journey took him to the crumbling remnants of Kirod's palace. The great halls that had once echoed with the laughter of courtiers now lay silent, save for the wind that howled through broken windows and the occasional creak of old wood shifting underfoot. It was a place consumed by time, a place that no living soul had dared to enter in years. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. The palace had been abandoned, the tapestries faded and torn, the golden trimmings of the walls tarnished by time, yet in the center of the throne room, untouched by the ravages of age, sat the emperor's table, and there, resting before him, was the tea set. Varric's heart quickened. He could feel the weight of the cursed relics before him. He reached out, trembling, his fingers brushing against the fine porcelain. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The faintest pulse of energy seemed to emanate from the cups, and then, as he lifted one, a chill ran through him. A voice, cold and distant, whispered in his ear. "You were not the first." Varric recoiled, his breath hitching in his throat. He was not alone. The spirits of those who had fallen at Kirod's command had not been laid to rest. They had waited, silently, in the shadows, guarding the cursed teacups, ensuring that none could wield the power contained within them without paying the ultimate price. Varric, now paralyzed by fear, dropped the cup. It shattered, and in that instant, the world around him seemed to explode with sound. The walls groaned, the floor cracked open, and the spirits, once silent, now cried out in unison, a chorus of rage and pain. The curse was alive again. In a panic, Varric stumbled back, but the spirits surrounded him. He tried to run, but the palace seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in. The whispers grew louder, their voices more insistent. He could feel the poison of the past coursing through his veins, the same poison that had once consumed Kirod. It was too late. The curse had already begun to claim him. The tale of Emperor Kirod, of his obsession, his madness, and his eventual downfall, did not end with Varric. The cursed teacups, and the empire they had destroyed, lived on, buried in legend, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to seek their power. In the years that followed, the story would be retold, not just as a warning, but as a reminder of the fragility of power, the cost of obsession, and the darkness that lies in every desire for control. The teacups, however, remain where they always have, lost, hidden in the depths of forgotten places, waiting for the next seeker. There will always be someone drawn to them, someone who believes they can conquer the curse, someone who believes they can wield power without paying the price. And perhaps they will find them. Perhaps they will fall prey to the same curse that claimed Kirod, that claimed the empire. that claimed the very soul of anyone who dared to reach too far. Power, obsession, the thirst for more. It is a cycle as old as time itself, and it is a cycle that will never end. Because there is always someone, somewhere, willing to make the same mistake. What is the true cost of obsession? Can power ever truly be controlled? Or are we all, in the end, slaves to it?